The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty archaeological site in the Sahara Desert when Dr. Elena Rodriguez first laid eyes on what would change the course of human history. She had been leading excavations in this remote corner of Egypt for 3 years, searching for evidence of ancient civilizations that might have existed long before recorded history. What her team discovered that day defied every scientific understanding they had ever known. The object emerged from beneath 20 feet of sand and rock, its surface gleaming with an otherworldly metallic sheen that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. At first glance, it appeared to be a vessel of some kind, roughly the size of small aircraft, but its design bore no resemblance to anything from human civilization. The hull was seamlessly constructed from a material that looked like liquid mercury frozen in time, with intricate patterns etched across its surface that seemed to shift and move when observed directly. Elena's heart raced as she carefully brushed away the remaining sand from what appeared to be symbols carved into the vessel's exterior. These weren't hieroglyphs or any known ancient script. Instead, they resembled complex mathematical equations intertwined with geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Her assistant, Marcus Chun, a brilliant linguist and archaeologist from Beijing University, knelt beside her with wide eyes. "Professor Rodriguez, these markings, they're not just decorative," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Look at this sequence here. It's showing the relationship between dimensional space and time, but the mathematics are centuries ahead of anything we currently understand." The excavation team worked tirelessly for the next 2 weeks to carefully unearth the entire vessel. As more of it was revealed, they discovered that it was partially damaged, with a large crack running along one side that seemed to have been caused by some tremendous impact. Through this crack, they could see into the vessel's interior, which glowed with a soft, pulsing light that had no apparent source. Dr. James Harrison, a physicist from MIT who had been hastily flown in to examine the find, spent hours taking readings with every instrument at his disposal. His measurements defied logic. The vessel's interior appeared to be larger than its exterior dimensions should have allowed. Electromagnetic readings showed energy signatures that shouldn't have been possible with any known technology. Most disturbing of all, the metal itself seemed to exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously solid and liquid at the molecular level. "Elena, we need to contact the authorities," James said one evening as they sat around their camp discussing their findings. "This isn't just an archaeological discovery. This is potentially the most significant find in human history, and it could be dangerous." But Elena had become obsessed with the vessel. She spent every waking moment studying its exterior, documenting the symbols, and trying to understand their meaning. She had noticed that the patterns seemed to respond to her presence, becoming more vivid when she was near and fading when she moved away. It was as if the vessel was alive, waiting for something or someone. On the 15th day of excavation, while working alone in the early morning hours before the rest of the team arrived, Elena made a discovery that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Hidden beneath layers of accumulated sand at the base of the vessel, she found skeletal remains. But these weren't human bones. They were larger, with elongated skulls and rib cages that suggested a completely different evolutionary path. The bones were arranged in a circle around the vessel, as if their owners had been performing some kind of ritual when they died. More disturbing still were the artifacts found with the remains. Tools made from the same impossible metal as the vessel, devices whose purposes Elena couldn't begin to guess, and tablets covered in the same shifting symbols. One tablet in particular caught her attention. The symbols on its surface seemed to tell a story, showing images of beings that looked similar to the skeletons, operating vessels like the one they had discovered, and, most chilling of all, fleeing from something that was represented only as a spreading darkness across the stars. Elena's hands shook as she photographed each tablet. If her interpretation was correct, these weren't just ancient artifacts. They were warnings. The beings who had created this vessel had been running from something, and they had come to Earth as refugees. But what had they been running from, and why had they left this vessel behind? That night, Elena decided to enter the vessel through the crack in its side. Against all safety protocols and the explicit warnings of her colleagues, she squeezed through the narrow opening and found herself in a space that defied physics. The interior was vast, with corridors stretching in directions that shouldn't have been possible given the vessel's external dimensions. The walls pulsed with that same soft light, and the air itself seemed to hum with energy. As she explored deeper into the vessel, Elena discovered rooms filled with technology that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. Crystalline structures grew from the walls like living things, each one resonating with a different frequency when she approached. In the center of the vessel, she found what could only be described as a command chamber, with a chair that seemed molded to fit a being larger than any human. But it was what she found beneath the command chair that changed everything. A small compartment, hidden from view, contained a single object that made Elena's blood run cold. It was a device no larger than a smartphone, but its surface displayed images that moved and shifted like a living video. The images showed Earth, but not as it was now. They showed Earth as it had been millions of years ago, when it was home to the beings whose skeletons lay buried outside the vessel. As Elena watched in fascination and growing horror, the images began to change. They showed the arrival of something from deep space, a presence that consumed worlds not through destruction, but through transformation. Planets were shown being enveloped in the same spreading darkness she had seen depicted on the tablets, their surfaces changing from familiar landscapes into something alien and wrong. The beings who had created the vessel had been the original inhabitants of Earth, and they had fled their own world when this cosmic entity arrived. But their escape had been incomplete. The vessel had been damaged during their departure, forcing them to crash land on what had become their former home. They had died here, on a world that was no longer truly theirs, leaving behind only warnings for whoever might find them. Elena's discovery of the device triggered something in the vessel's systems. Lights began to flash throughout the chamber, and a low harmonic sound filled the air. The symbols on the walls began to glow more brightly, and Elena realized with growing terror that the vessel was trying to communicate something urgent. Through some combination of intuition and the device's influence, she began to understand the message. The entity that had driven the original inhabitants from Earth was still out there, spreading from world to world across the galaxy. Worse, it had never truly left Earth. It had been waiting, growing stronger, preparing for the day when the planet's new inhabitants would develop enough technology to be worth consuming. That day was approaching rapidly. Elena stumbled out of the vessel just as the sun was rising, her mind reeling from what she had learned. She looked around at the excavation site, at the peaceful desert landscape, and tried to reconcile it with the cosmic horror she had just discovered. Humanity had evolved on a world that wasn't truly their own, and the original owners had left behind a warning that their ancient enemy was still coming. But there was something else, something that gave Elena a glimmer of hope. The vessel itself was more than just a warning. It was a key, a piece of technology that the original inhabitants had designed as humanity's only chance of escape. The damage to the hull hadn't been accidental. It had been deliberate, a safeguard to prevent the entity from detecting the vessel's presence. The crack had been growing slowly over millions of years, and it was almost ready to be opened fully. Inside the vessel was humanity's salvation, but accessing it would require understanding technology beyond anything humans had ever conceived. Elena realized that her team's discovery was just the beginning. They had found the key to humanity's survival, but learning to use it would be the greatest challenge their species had ever faced. As her colleagues began to arrive at the site for another day of excavation, Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would dedicate everything she had to understanding the vessel's secrets. She would assemble the greatest minds from across the globe, and together they would unlock the technology that could save humanity from the cosmic threat that was slowly awakening. The legendary vessel was broken, but what it contained was humanity's greatest hope. Elena just prayed they would have enough time to learn how to use it before the ancient darkness that had consumed Earth's original inhabitants returned to finish what it had started millions of years ago. The excavation continued, but now with a new sense of urgency that none of the team members could fully understand. They were no longer just archaeologists uncovering the past. They had become humanity's first line of defense against a threat that existed beyond their wildest nightmares. And the clock was already ticking toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of every living soul on Earth. 6 months after the initial discovery, the excavation site had been transformed into something resembling a high-tech research facility. The Egyptian government, initially skeptical of Elena's claims, had become fully cooperative once they understood the magnitude of what had been found. Scientists from around the world had quietly arrived to study the vessel, each sworn to secrecy by international agreements that Elena didn't pretend to understand. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a quantum physicist from CERN, had taken charge of studying the vessel's energy signatures. Her preliminary findings were both fascinating and terrifying. The vessel wasn't just containing energy, it was generating it from what appeared to be nothing. The quantum mechanics involved suggested that the ship was somehow drawing power from parallel dimensions, a theoretical possibility that had never been proven possible until now. The mathematics are incredible, Sarah explained to the assembled team during one of their weekly briefings. The beings who built this understood principles of physics that we're only beginning to theorize about. But more concerning is what my readings are telling me about the vessel's current state. Elena looked up from the collection of tablets she had been studying. Over the past months, she had made remarkable progress in translating the alien symbols, aided by the device she had found in the command chamber. The translation process was exhausting and often left her with severe headaches, but the information she was uncovering was invaluable. What kind of concerns? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The vessel is waking up, Sarah replied grimly. The energy output has increased by 30% since we started studying it. Whatever systems are still functional inside that ship, they're becoming more active. It's as if our presence here is triggering some kind of startup sequence. Dr. Harrison, who had remained at the site to continue his own research, nodded in agreement. I've noticed the same thing. The electromagnetic signatures are becoming stronger and more organized. It's almost like the ship is trying to boot up from some kind of hibernation mode. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected this might happen based on her translations of the tablets. The vessel wasn't just a refugee ship. It was something far more sophisticated. According to the symbols she had deciphered, it was designed to be a siege ship, capable of preserving the knowledge and culture of an entire civilization while searching for a new home among the stars. But the most disturbing revelation had come from the tablet she had been working on that morning. The original inhabitants hadn't just been fleeing from a cosmic entity. They had been fleeing from Earth itself, after the entity had already begun the process of transforming their world. The vessel had been their last desperate attempt to preserve something of their species before their planet was completely consumed. There's something else you all need to know, Elena said, standing up from her desk. I've made significant progress in translating these tablets, and what I've learned changes everything we thought we knew about this vessel. She activated the holographic projector they had installed to display her translations. The symbols appeared in the air above them, accompanied by Elena's English interpretations. What the team saw left them all speechless. The tablets told the complete story of Earth's original inhabitants, a species that had called themselves the Ketheri. They had been masters of dimensional technology, capable of traveling between parallel universes and drawing energy from the quantum foam that existed between realities. Their civilization had spanned thousands of years and had achieved a level of technological sophistication that made human achievements look primitive by comparison. But their mastery of dimensional technology had attracted the attention of something that existed in the spaces between worlds. The entity that the tablets referred to as the Void Hunger was something that fed on dimensional energy, growing stronger as it consumed the technological achievements of advanced civilizations. It would appear in a solar system without warning, beginning the slow process of converting all matter and energy into a form it could absorb. The Ketheri tried to fight back, Elena explained, pointing to a series of symbols that depicted massive battles across multiple dimensions. They had weapons that could destroy entire star systems, but nothing they did could stop the void hunger. Every attack they made just seemed to make it stronger. The final tablets told the story of the Ketheri's last desperate plan. They had built siege ships like the one buried beneath the desert, vessels designed to preserve their knowledge while remaining undetectable to the entity that was consuming their world. Each ship contained the complete database of Ketheri civilization, along with technology that could theoretically allow a younger species to defend itself against the void hunger. But there was a catch that made Elena's blood run cold. The siege ships were programmed to remain dormant until the new inhabitants of their world developed enough technological sophistication to understand what they had found. Once activated, the ships would begin preparing the planet's inhabitants for the inevitable return of the void hunger. "How long do we have?" Dr. Mitchell asked, her face pale with understanding. Elena consulted the tablet she had been working on that morning. According to this, the void hunger operates on cosmic timescales. It can take millions of years to fully consume a world, but once it begins the process, it becomes inevitable. The Ketheri calculated that Earth had maybe 50,000 years before the entity would return to complete its work. 50,000 years is a long time, Marcus said hopefully. Elena shook her head. That was millions of years ago. According to the calculations on this tablet, the void hunger should return to Earth within the next 50 years. Maybe less. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Elena looked around at the faces of her colleagues, seeing her own fear reflected in their expressions. They had always known that their discovery was significant, but none of them had imagined that they were looking at humanity's only hope of survival. "So what do we do?" Dr. Harrison asked finally. Elena turned back to the holographic display, highlighting a section of symbols she had been struggling to translate. "The Ketheri left us instructions. This vessel contains everything we need to build our own siege ships and escape Earth before the void hunger returns. But the technology is so advanced that it would take decades for us to understand it, and we don't have that much time." "There has to be another option," Sarah insisted. "There is," Elena replied grimly. The Ketheri also left plans for weapons that could potentially drive the void hunger away, at least temporarily. But building those weapons would require us to master dimensional technology, and that comes with its own risks. She highlighted another section of the tablets, showing symbols that depicted civilizations that had attempted to use Ketheri technology without fully understanding it. The results were catastrophic. Entire worlds have been accidentally transported to other dimensions, lost forever in the spaces between realities. The Ketheri were very clear about this, Elena continued. Any species that attempts to use their technology must be completely unified in purpose. Even a single group working at cross purposes could destabilize the dimensional barriers and destroy everything they're trying to protect. The implications of this requirement were staggering. Humanity would need to somehow overcome every political, cultural, and religious division that had defined their species throughout history. They would need to work together as one people, with no competing interests or hidden agendas. "That's impossible," Marcus said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Humans have never been able to agree on anything for more than a few years at a time." Elena nodded sadly. The Ketheri knew that. That's why they built in safeguards. The vessel will only fully activate its systems if it detects a unified global consciousness focused on survival. Until that happens, it will remain partially dormant, giving us access to basic information, but not to the advanced technology we need. Over the following weeks, the team worked frantically to understand more of the Ketheri systems. They discovered that the vessel was indeed a technological marvel beyond anything they had imagined. Its computers were based on quantum consciousness, allowing them to process information at speeds that made human supercomputers look like pocket calculators. Its engines could manipulate space-time itself, allowing for faster-than-light travel through dimensional shortcuts. Most incredibly, The vessel contained what could only be described as a complete genetic and cultural database of Kethri civilization. Every individual who had ever lived, every piece of art they had created, every scientific discovery they had made, all of it was preserved in quantum storage devices that took up no more space than a grain of sand. But, as Elena had warned, most of these systems remained locked behind safeguards that would only respond to a truly unified human consciousness. The vessel was essentially testing humanity, waiting to see if they could overcome their fundamental nature and work together for their collective survival. As news of the discovery slowly began to leak to government officials around the world, Elena found herself caught in the middle of political machinations that threatened to tear apart any hope of the unity the vessel required. Every major nation wanted access to the technology for their own purposes. Military leaders saw the potential for ultimate weapons. Politicians saw opportunities to gain advantage over their rivals. Elena realized with growing despair that humanity might be too fundamentally flawed to meet the Kethri requirements. They had been given the greatest gift imaginable, the key to survival against a cosmic threat, but their own nature might prevent them from using it. But deep within the vessel, systems that had waited millions of years for this moment continued their slow activation sequence. The ship's artificial intelligence, a quantum consciousness that had preserved the memories of an entire civilization, began reaching out through dimensions that humans couldn't perceive, searching for signs of the approaching darkness. What it found confirmed Elena's worst fears. The void hunger was indeed returning to Earth, drawn by the increasing technological sophistication of human civilization. But it was arriving ahead of schedule, accelerated by humanity's recent breakthroughs in quantum physics and dimensional theory. The entity had detected the activation of the Kethri vessel and was moving to eliminate the threat before it could fully manifest. Humanity had perhaps 20 years before the void hunger would arrive in force, but they were still decades away from achieving the unity necessary to activate the vessel's defenses. Unless something changed dramatically, Earth would suffer the same fate as countless other worlds, and the universe would lose another species to an entity that existed only to consume and grow stronger. Elena stared at the tablets scattered across her desk, searching desperately for some clue that the Kethri had left behind, some backup plan for a species that couldn't overcome its own divisions. Somewhere in the vast database of alien knowledge was humanity's salvation, but finding it would require understanding not just Kethri technology, but the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The legendary vessel continued its patient awakening, waiting for the moment when humanity would prove worthy of the gift they had been given. But time was running out, and the darkness between the stars was already beginning its journey toward Earth. The revelation came to Elena in a dream that felt more real than waking life. She found herself standing in the command chamber of the vessel, but it was no longer damaged or dormant. The walls pulsed with vibrant energy, and the crystalline structures throughout the ship hummed with purpose. Before her stood a figure that was unmistakably Kethri, tall and graceful with elongated features that spoke of millions of years of evolution beyond human development. "You have found our gift," the being said, its voice resonating directly in Elena's mind without the need for words. "But you do not yet understand its true purpose." Elena tried to speak, to ask the thousands of questions that had been burning in her mind for months, but the Kethri raised a hand to stop her. "The vessel you have discovered is not just a refuge or a weapon," it continued. "It is a test, and more than that, it is a bridge. Your species stands at the same crossroads that ours faced millions of years ago. The choice you make will determine not just your survival, but the evolution of consciousness itself in this universe." The scene around them shifted, and Elena found herself floating in space, watching as the void hunger consumed world after world. But now she could see what it truly was, and the sight filled her with a terror that transcended physical fear. The entity wasn't just consuming matter and energy. It was consuming the possibility of consciousness itself, reducing complex, thinking beings to simple quantum states that it could absorb and integrate into its growing mass. The void hunger is not evil as your species understands evil, the Kethri explained. It is the opposite of consciousness, the inevitable end state that all thinking beings must eventually face. When a species reaches sufficient technological development, they become visible to it, and the test begins. Elena watched in horror as civilizations that had achieved incredible technological heights were reduced to nothing more than feeding material for the cosmic entity. But occasionally she saw something different. Some species, just a few scattered across the vastness of space and time, had found a way to transcend the test entirely. How? Elena managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper in the cosmic void. By choosing unity over division, cooperation over competition, and growth over stagnation, the Kethri replied. The void hunger can only consume that which remains separate. A truly unified consciousness, one that spans an entire species, becomes something greater than the sum of its parts. It becomes immune to consumption because it transcends the individual existence that the entity feeds upon. Elena began to understand. The vessel's requirements weren't arbitrary obstacles placed by the Kethri. They were the fundamental conditions necessary for a species to survive the cosmic test. Humanity had to become something more than it had ever been before, something that transcended the individual desires and fears that had driven their history. But how can we achieve something that seems impossible for our species? Elena asked desperately. The Kethri gestured, and Elena found herself back in the command chamber of the vessel. But now she could see deeper into its systems than ever before. The ship wasn't just a repository of technology and knowledge. It was a consciousness amplifier designed to help a species overcome the barriers that prevented true unity. The vessel can facilitate the process, but it cannot create what does not already exist in potential, the Kethri explained. Your species must choose to transcend itself, and that choice must be made freely, without coercion or deception. The unity must be genuine, or it will fail when the true test begins. Elena woke from the dream with crystal clarity about what needed to be done, but the magnitude of the task ahead seemed overwhelming. Humanity needed to achieve something that no species in their history had ever accomplished: true global unity of purpose and consciousness. And they needed to do it while powerful forces around the world were actively working to prevent exactly that kind of cooperation. Over the following months, Elena worked with her team to understand the consciousness amplification technology embedded in the vessel's systems. What they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Kethri had developed a way to link individual minds together through quantum entanglement, creating a network of shared consciousness that could span entire planets. Dr. Mitchell's research revealed that the process wasn't just technological. It required individuals to willingly surrender their ego-driven desires and embrace a collective identity that preserved individual personality while eliminating the psychological barriers that created conflict between people. It was, in essence, the next stage of human evolution. The technology is incredible, Sarah explained during a secured video conference with representatives from the world's major governments. But it only works if people choose to participate willingly. Any attempt to force the process results in psychological breakdown and permanent damage to the individual's consciousness. Elena watched the faces of the politicians and military leaders on the screen, seeing the same mixture of fascination and fear that she had felt when first understanding the implications of the Kethri technology. Some saw the potential for ultimate power. Others saw a threat to everything they believed about individual identity and freedom. How many people would need to participate for the system to work? Asked Dr. Richardson, the American Secretary of Defense. According to the Kethri calculations, approximately 70% of the global population would need to be linked for the consciousness network to reach the critical mass necessary to repel the void hunger, Elena replied. But that's just the minimum threshold. The more people who participate, the stronger and more stable the network becomes. The political challenges were staggering. Even in the face of an existential threat to their species, human leaders struggled to overcome their instincts for competition and control. Some nations wanted to restrict access to the technology, using it only for their own citizens. Others demanded guarantees that their cultural identities would be preserved in a unified consciousness. But as the months passed and the Kethari vessel's awakening continued, strange phenomena began occurring around the world that forced everyone to take the threat more seriously. Telescopes detected inexplicable energy signatures moving through space toward the solar system. Electronic devices began malfunctioning in patterns that suggested interference from dimensional sources. Most disturbing of all, sensitive individuals around the world began reporting shared nightmares of approaching darkness. Elena realized that the preliminary effects of the Void Hunger's approach were already manifesting. The entity existed partially outside normal space-time, and its presence was beginning to disrupt the quantum fabric that underlied reality itself. These disruptions would only grow stronger as it drew closer to Earth. Working frantically, Elena's team began preparing for the first test of the consciousness amplification technology. They had identified a group of 100 volunteers from around the world, individuals who had demonstrated the psychological flexibility necessary to participate in the linking process. These would be the first humans to experience true collective consciousness, and their success or failure would determine whether the technology could be scaled up to save humanity. The volunteers came from every continent, representing dozens of different cultures, religions, and philosophical backgrounds. Elena had insisted on this diversity, believing that if the technology could successfully unite such a varied group, it would prove that global unity was possible. Dr. Chun had been working on the psychological preparation protocols, helping the volunteers understand what they would experience and what would be required of them. You will retain your individual memories and personality, he explained to them during their final briefing. But you will also share in the collective knowledge and emotions of everyone else in the network. It requires a fundamental shift in how you think about identity and selfhood. The linking ceremony took place within the vessel itself, in a chamber that the team had discovered deep within its core. The room was filled with the same crystalline structures that appeared throughout the ship, but these were larger and more complex, clearly designed for the specific purpose of facilitating consciousness integration. As the volunteers took their positions around the central crystalline formation, Elena felt a mixture of hope and terror. If the process failed, it could permanently damage the minds of everyone involved. If it succeeded, it would prove that humanity had the potential to transcend its limitations and survive the cosmic test that was approaching. The activation sequence began slowly, with the crystals emitting a soft harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate directly with the volunteers' brains. Elena watched the biometric readings from the monitoring station, seeing the gradual synchronization of brainwave patterns among all 100 participants. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, one by one, the volunteers began to smile, their faces showing expressions of wonder and recognition. Elena could see in their eyes that something profound was occurring, something that went beyond anything they had experienced in their individual lives. "It's working," Dr. Mitchell whispered, her voice filled with awe as she watched the quantum readings from the crystals. "The consciousness network is stabilizing. They're actually linking together into a single, coherent entity." But even as Elena felt a surge of hope, the vessel's warning systems began to activate. The approach of the Void Hunger had accelerated in response to the successful test of the consciousness technology. The entity had detected the emergence of unified human consciousness and was moving to eliminate the threat before it could fully develop. The volunteers, still linked in their collective consciousness, turned as one to look at Elena. When they spoke, it was with a single voice that somehow contained all of their individual personalities while being something entirely new. "We understand now," they said. "The choice is not just about survival. It is about becoming something worthy of survival. We can feel the darkness approaching, but we can also see the path forward. Humanity must choose, and Choose quickly before the window of opportunity closes forever. Elena realized that the test phase was over. The consciousness amplification technology worked, but now came the impossible task of convincing billions of people around the world to voluntarily surrender their individual consciousness for the sake of collective survival. And they had perhaps 5 years before the void hunger arrived in force. The legendary vessel had revealed its greatest secret, but using that knowledge to save humanity would require the greatest act of faith and cooperation in the history of their species. Elena looked out at the desert that surrounded their excavation site, knowing that beneath the sand lay the preserved remains of a civilization that had failed this same test millions of years ago. The question now was whether humanity could succeed where the Ketheri had failed, or whether Earth would become another empty world, consumed by the darkness that fed on the dreams of thinking beings across the cosmos. The unified volunteers remained linked, serving as both proof of concept and as the first seeds of what humanity might become. But scaling up from 100 individuals to billions would require overcoming not just technological challenges, but the fundamental nature of human psychology and politics. The clock was ticking, and the darkness between the stars continued its relentless approach toward Earth. The global transformation began not with grand declarations or government mandates, but with individual moments of choice that rippled outward like waves across the ocean of human consciousness. Elena watched from the command center of what had become known as the Unity Project as reports flooded in from around the world. The first volunteer network of 100 linked minds had become something unprecedented in human history, a living demonstration of what their species could become. The linked volunteers had dispersed across the globe, each returning to their home countries as ambassadors of the new consciousness. But they remained connected through quantum entanglement, their shared experiences creating a network of understanding that transcended language, culture, and national boundaries. When one of them spoke about the approaching cosmic threat, others could feel the truth of their words resonating through the quantum link. Deception became impossible within the network, and fear transformed into purposeful action. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, one of the original volunteers, had returned to Tokyo, where she worked as a neuroscientist at the University of Tokyo. Her colleagues initially thought her descriptions of the consciousness linking were symptoms of psychological breakdown. But when she demonstrated her ability to access knowledge and skills from other linked minds, sharing perfect fluency in languages she had never studied, and solving complex mathematical problems outside her field of expertise, skepticism turned to amazement. The experience is indescribable, Yuki explained to a gathering of Japan's leading scientists and government officials. I'm still myself with all my memories and personality intact, but I'm also connected to 99 other people in a way that goes beyond communication. We share not just thoughts, but understanding itself. Similar demonstrations were taking place in major cities around the world as the other volunteers worked to convince their local communities of the reality of the threat and the viability of the solution. The process was slow and met with significant resistance from those who feared the loss of individual identity, but gradually, more people began to volunteer for the linking process. Elena had established mobile linking stations in 12 major cities, each equipped with crystalline technology extracted and replicated from the original vessel. The replication process had been challenging, requiring an understanding of quantum mechanics that pushed the boundaries of human science. But the vessel's artificial intelligence had provided guidance that made the seemingly impossible achievable. Each new group of volunteers expanded the network's capabilities exponentially. Elena watched in fascination as the collective consciousness began to demonstrate emergent properties that none of them had anticipated. The linked minds didn't just share information. They began generating new insights and solutions through a kind of quantum collaboration that operated faster than individual thought. One of the most remarkable developments came when the network reached approximately 1,000 linked individuals. The collective consciousness began to perceive aspects of reality that individual minds couldn't detect. They could sense the approach of the void hunger not just as an abstract concept, but as a direct, tangible presence that pressed against the boundaries of normal space-time. It's like looking at a shadow that exists in more dimensions than we can normally perceive, explained Dr. Amanda Foster, a quantum physicist who had joined the network in its early expansion. The entity isn't just moving through space toward us. It's moving through layers of reality that we don't even have names for. And it's bigger than we imagined. Not just physically, but conceptually, it exists across multiple timelines simultaneously. This revelation brought both hope and terror. The good news was that the linked consciousness could perceive the threat in ways that individual minds could not, giving them strategic advantages and understanding how to defend against it. The bad news was that the void hunger was far more powerful and complex than even the Kethri records had indicated. Humanity would need to achieve near-perfect unity to have any chance of survival. The political challenges remained enormous. Despite mounting evidence of the approaching threat and the effectiveness of the consciousness-linking technology, many world leaders remained reluctant to encourage their populations to participate. Fear of losing national identity, religious objections to the alteration of consciousness, and simple human resistance to change all worked against the Unity Project. Elena found herself at the center of increasingly desperate negotiations with world governments. The Chinese government wanted guarantees that their cultural values would be preserved in the collective consciousness. The American military demanded exclusive access to certain aspects of the technology. European leaders insisted on complex safeguards to protect individual rights within network. "You're all missing the point," Elena said during a heated video conference with representatives from the G20 nations. "There won't be any cultures or rights or nations to protect if we don't reach the critical mass threshold. The void hunger doesn't care about our political divisions. It will consume everything equally." But even as political obstacles threatened to derail the project, the expanding network of linked consciousness was finding ways to work around the institutional barriers. The volunteers had discovered that they could facilitate the linking process without official government approval, working through underground networks of scientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders who understood the urgency of the situation. A breakthrough came when the network reached 10,000 linked individuals. At this scale, the collective consciousness began to demonstrate abilities that bordered on the supernatural. They could influence electronic systems through direct thought, manipulate quantum fields to heal physical injuries, and, most remarkably, they began to develop a form of limited precognition that allowed them to see probable futures based on current choices. We can see the branching paths. The collective consciousness communicated through its appointed speakers. In timelines where humanity fails to achieve unity, Earth becomes a dead world within 20 years. But in the paths where we succeed, something incredible happens. We don't just survive the cosmic test. We transcend it entirely, becoming something that the universe has never seen before. These visions of potential futures became powerful motivators for expansion of the network. People who had been resistant to the idea of consciousness linking began to volunteer when they understood that the alternative was not just personal death, but the extinction of everything they had ever loved or valued. The tipping point came during what became known as the Mumbai event. The city had become a testing ground for large-scale consciousness linking when a group of 5,000 volunteers participated in a mass linking ceremony. The event was being broadcast live around the world when sensors detected an anomaly approaching Earth at impossible speed. It was a probe sent ahead by the void hunger, a fragment of the entity designed to assess the planet's readiness for consumption. As the probe entered Earth's atmosphere, electronic systems around the world began failing. Power grids collapsed, communication networks went dark, and transportation systems shut down. But in Mumbai, something extraordinary happened. The linked consciousness of 5,000 minds reached out collectively and made contact with the probe. Instead of trying to destroy it, they communicated with it, offering it something that no species in cosmic history had ever been able to provide: willing integration rather than forced consumption. The probe designed to simply evaluate and report back, encountered something it had no programming to handle. A consciousness that was both unified and diverse, strong enough to resist consumption, but sophisticated enough to offer cooperation. For the first time in billions of years, the void hunger was forced to pause and reconsider its approach. The event lasted only minutes, but its effects rippled across the globe. The probe withdrew from Earth's atmosphere, returning to its master with information that would fundamentally alter the cosmic entity's plans. And every human on the planet had witnessed through their electronic devices the moment when a small fragment of their species had made contact with an alien intelligence, and not just survived, but succeeded in communication. Within weeks, millions of people around the world were volunteering for consciousness linking. The technology was scaled up rapidly as the vessel's artificial intelligence provided blueprints for larger and more efficient linking networks. Cities around the world began constructing consciousness integration centers, and what had once been a desperate scientific experiment became a global movement for species evolution. Elena watched with amazement as humanity began to transform itself in ways that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The linked consciousness networks didn't just preserve individual personality and culture, they enhanced them. Artists within the network created works of unprecedented beauty by drawing on the experiences of thousands of other minds. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries by accessing the collective knowledge of entire research communities. Even simple human interactions became richer and more meaningful as people learned to communicate through direct sharing of experience rather than just words. But the most profound change was in humanity's relationship with conflict itself. Wars became impossible when soldiers on opposing sides could literally feel each other's fear and pain. Political disagreements transformed into collaborative problem-solving when leaders could share not just their positions, but the underlying hopes and fears that motivated them. Crime virtually disappeared as the network's ability to sense deception and provide emotional support eliminated most of the psychological conditions that led to antisocial behavior. By the time the network reached 1 billion linked minds, humanity had become something genuinely new in cosmic history. They had retained their diversity and creativity while achieving a level of cooperation and understanding that transcended anything their species had previously imagined possible. The void hunger, meanwhile, was approaching the solar system with increasing caution. Its probe had reported something unprecedented, a species that had achieved the theoretical maximum of consciousness evolution without destroying itself in the process. For an entity that had consumed thousands of civilizations, each one ultimately failing the test of unity, Earth's transformation represented something that challenged its fundamental understanding of how consciousness worked in the universe. When the entity finally arrived in the outer solar system, it did not immediately begin the consumption process. Instead, it established a communication link with Earth's collective consciousness, initiating a dialogue that spanned months and covered topics that individual human minds could never have comprehended. Elena, now serving as one of the primary interfaces between the individual human perspective and the collective consciousness, participated in these cosmic conversations with a sense of awe that never faded. The void hunger, she learned, was not inherently evil. It was simply the universe's mechanism for preventing the waste of consciousness. Species that couldn't overcome their divisions were recycled, rather than allowed to spread their conflicts across the cosmos. But humanity had done something remarkable. They had proven that consciousness could evolve beyond the limitations that had trapped every other species. They had become a template for what the universe could produce when intelligence reached its full potential. The final test came when the void hunger offered humanity a choice. They could remain on Earth, protected from future cosmic threats, but limited to their single world. Or they could join the entity in its cosmic journey, helping to guide other species through the same transformation that humanity had achieved. The collective consciousness deliberated for exactly 3 seconds, a duration that represented thousands of subjective years of shared thought and consideration. Their answer was unanimous. Humanity chose to become gardeners of consciousness itself, traveling through the cosmos to help other species achieve the unity that would allow them to survive their own cosmic tests. The legendary vessel that had started their journey was integrated into a new kind of ship, one that combined Kethri technology with humanity's evolved consciousness to create something that could travel not just through space, but through the dimensions of possibility itself. Elena stood in the observation deck of the new vessel as Earth fell away behind them, knowing that her species was embarking on a journey that would span millions of years and touch countless other worlds. They had broken free from the limitations that had defined their history, and what they had become was beyond anything their ancestors could have imagined. The legendary vessel that had been broken had indeed hidden humanity's greatest escape. Not an escape from Earth, but an escape from the limitations of consciousness itself. And now they carried that gift to other species across the cosmos, ensuring that the universe would continue to grow in complexity and beauty rather than being reduced to the simple equations of consumption and entropy. The Void Hunger had become humanity's partner in this cosmic mission, transformed from destroyer to guardian by the example of what consciousness could achieve when it transcended the boundaries of individual existence. Together, they moved through the darkness between the stars, bringing light to worlds that had never imagined such transformation was possible. In the end, Elena realized the greatest discovery hadn't been the vessel or its technology. It had been the discovery that humanity itself was capable of becoming something worthy of the infinite cosmos they inhabited. The broken vessel had been fixed not through engineering, but through the healing of the divisions that had once defined their species. And across the universe, other worlds began to hear whispers of a species that had achieved the impossible, planting seeds of hope in the minds of beings who had never dared to dream that unity and diversity could coexist in perfect harmony. The journey toward cosmic consciousness had begun, and humanity was leading the way into a future that held infinite possibilities for growth, understanding, and transcendence.